Moi ja tervetuloa seuraavaan osaan Pastor's Lounge podcastista. Tänään me tullaan keskustelemaan hyvin ajankohtaisesta aiheesta. George Floydin murha pari viikkoa sitten tai 3 viikkoa sitten on koskettanut ja liikuttanut oikeastaan koko maailmaa. Ja siitä on seurannut myös uudestaan Black Lives Matter-liikkeen nousu tai tapahtumia ympäri maailmaa. Siitäkin tullaan keskustelemaan tänään. Ja tänään mulla on Eli Honkanen mukana. Tervetuloa.
Kiitos.
Ja mä uskon, että tämä osa tulee auttamaan sua ymmärtämään, mistä on kyse, ja myös miettimään meidän kukin oman kohdalla, mitä me voidaan tehdä, mitä tämä merkitsee. Ja tämä tulee olemaan englanniksi tänään, ja tullaan viemään keskustelua englanniksi, joten ota se enkun tuntina, jos se on vähän haastavaa. Mä uskon, että tulet pysymään mukana erittäin hyvin. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you for having me.
Great to do this together. And you've been living in Finland for a number of years already.
Yes.
But just as a short introduction, could you please share a little about your life, where you come from, what brought you to Finland in the first place, and what are you up to nowadays?
Thank you. My name is Eleanor Honkanen, and I arrived in Finland a little over 8 years ago. So I came to Finland for education.
Yeah.
I went to study in a really small village in Valkeakoski, where I know a lot of people don't know it, but some people do.
Yeah.
But I went there to study some engineering and did my fair share of hard work. So instead of 4 years, I did it in 2 years, graduated, did some projects, and moved down here to see chances of getting work and also being closer to my siblings. I have a few sisters here.
Wow, cool. And where are you from?
I'm from Malawi.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. Where did she come from? I came from Malawi, actually, the warm heart of Africa.
Yeah.
So somewhere southern part of Africa.
Cool.
Yeah.
So good. And we've seen the events around the murder of George Floyd and the movement of Afro-Americans, but also Africans around the world reacting to this. Could we start with talking a little about what is this all about? What has raised so much feelings and even anger around the world because of this? Could you just start by opening up the events around that? And I know this isn't the only event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this has been such a tough and heavy time because now it's these events that have been happening behind the scenes. There's always been small videos and pages that send out these kind of things, like somebody being murdered and police brutality and so on. And so there's been an underlying pain that's been going on for a long time. Yeah. And I feel like the African community or the people of color have been crying out for help for so long. And now when something happened, when everyone can see, it felt like it's time to actually say it even louder, because now what they've been trying to say for the whole time is now seen, and there is open evidence for that. So that's why this has been both tough and also relieving to see that finally the world is seeing what other people have been seeing all along in the secret.
Yeah.
And having people stand together and actually voice out, not just the Black community, but everyone in society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously what's been going on behind the background, without maybe the newspapers writing too much about it, is that there is a big inequality in how, at least in the United States, police relate towards the Black community compared to the white community.
Yeah.
And it seems like there is a lower threshold to be brutal towards black people. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct, and I think this has been going on for so many years, but of course when it comes to, there's something that is so famous in the American community when it comes to the police is like racial profiling. So like black people receive a certain kind of treatment because they are associated with, you could be a thug, they could be standing on the street somewhere waiting for somebody, or then some people have been just arrested because they look like somebody.
Right.
And so there is always a difference, you know, you have situations where not only the police brutality, but actually the justice system does not actually support. You find people, white guy or black person, same murder, same history, but they get 2 different sentences. It's been like always an imbalance in the justice that, you know, people who are of color get a large, like a bigger sentencing than somebody who is like in, for example, white person. And also when it comes to the police on the streets or wherever they are, it's like when they're more polite towards the white people than the black people. So that's been going on for so long. It has created terror in black people's homes because from a young age, as young as 3-year-olds in their homes, like they already give them prep talks like, what do you do when you meet the police? Wow. So like when you see the trauma and you see the results and how people are raising their children in fear of that. And every time you go on the road, if the police stop you, you're actually afraid, am I going to die or am I going to make it? So there's been a lot of that, and it's kind of become a norm of how people live there, which is really sad.
Yeah, it is very, very even devastating to hear. And would you say from your point of view, is it like, obviously it's about racism, it's about some sense of discrimination. Is it something that is related to people who are racist, which would be like somehow certain individuals in the community, or is it more like a systematic issue in the American society?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and it's something that people really need to look into deeply. And I'm so glad that we're able to talk about it right now, because one thing people need to understand is there was a time in the United States of America where racism was so open. Like you can imagine the whole city of Helsinki divided, where black people are not allowed to go here. You cannot sit on the bus. You need to stand a certain way. You can't drink from the same tap. And when you're in a community, they chase you out. And if you're found in a white neighborhood, you are killed. So it's like there was actually a time when these things were there. And of course, they were birthed out of slavery. So if you go to that people who were brought in as slaves, now the slave has been stopped, but they're forced to live there, but they're not allowed to live there. So the slave trade ended, but then they went to systematic racism. Now they're different from us, they're lower than us. How do we treat them? Push them down in their society. And so what has happened is America has tried to get out of that, but as a result of ending of slavery, there was a systematic racism now that was built in they're not allowed to buy land, they're not allowed to go to school, get the same education, because back in the days when you were a slave, you're not allowed to learn how to read. You will only learn how to read if they'll cut your hands off, so that you will not be able to do anything with the things that you've learned. So you can already see that this is actually, when we look at it right now on TV, we're just thinking, they're overreacting. But it's coming from something that actually was out in the open as a whole nation of, for example, Finland. We're not saying Finland is, but there was only probably 1 or 2 people, white people, that were not racists and who were hiding people. And now it has turned around where there's not open racism, but there's maybe 1 or 2 people in a community that are still with that.
Yeah.
So there are roots that were planted that have borne fruit that you cannot find here and there. Some are in the police department, so that's where you have people treating people badly.
Yeah.
So it's so hard because there's now separation. There's people who are not into that racism thing, but it's still there. We have
still there,
we have fruits of different seeds that have been planted through all of that has happened.
Yeah, and it's raised kind of an underlying massive pain, which is not just linked to a few individuals, but a whole part of the population.
Yeah.
When you see or saw the video of murder of George Floyd and see these protests, what do you feel? What do you think when you look at that?
I think this was the first time when I actually saw it where I allowed myself to cry.
Wow.
Through this process and not just be like, this is the norm, it happens, because sometimes we point to get numb to these things. When you've seen a lot of videos popping up, then you're like, this is just another one, and you just like, this is how things are. Yeah. But I allowed myself to cry because then now I kind of having gone through grief recently, I'm seeing the result of everything, some things that happened years ago, over 400 years ago, things that happened then, and the result of it still happening now. Seeing that there are people still living in oppression, there's still like, there is still some fruit of that still existing today, and we're still fighting the same thing. It was kind of like, when I saw that this time, I just allowed myself to weep and say, no, just because I'm not in the same situation as them doesn't mean that things are okay in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I allowed myself to just stop and think like, hey, my world is okay right now, but this is still going on and it's not okay.
Yeah. And when you're saying this is still going on, if we dig a little deeper and talk about the history, what is it, or what has it looked like? And you mentioned slavery, and probably many things started over there. But could you tell a little more about how that has affected people's mentality and how it relates to the events of today?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and I think it's a really good opening. Like, going back to the root is always important. Like, when I think about slavery and some small bits of pieces of it still happening till now, but then back then when the Western world, the Europeans came and came to the African nation, for example, they brought in their power. Yeah. I don't know what they used because I'm not there. But like, the fact that they came in and they started to snatch people, kidnapping, and saying, hey, that we want them to work in our fields, or there's different parts. There were some that were actually selling people from Africa and then sending them abroad. And then there was some actually Europeans that stayed in Africa and were ruling people there. Yeah. And so like, it happened both sides. So there is those that are the slaves that were taken away and they were ill-treated in the countries, like for example in America, and the Portuguese or the Dutch or the French were going in some parts of Africa as well, just treating people badly. And there was a lot of murdering, raping, just brutality in general. Yeah. And with this oppression, I feel like the African people were broken because here comes powerful people in your peaceful, harmonious land, and they take everything away. They take your women, they take your children. They're breaking people apart emotionally, physically, and what happens is after, in the 1800s, when they abolished the slavery in America, it was still going on in Africa at that time. So you have a nation going through turmoil, breaking them from their power. They don't understand who they are. It's like how you have somebody who has been abused from childhood, for example. You take away their innocence, and all they have is all this anger, and they have their image of power has been this oppression that has been there, and taking care of one's own needs. Like bribery came from that slavery time. And then you wonder nowadays, why are African leaders so corrupt? And then you think it's just Africans. You forget that there was actually people there who got all these systems, who brought all these systems, and a people that lose their voice, a people who lose their identity. If they're made to feel like, hey, your language is not enough, learn this. And your hair looks so bad, do this. You are darker skinned, so you work over there, and you're lighter skinned, and this. And then what happens is, it turned people against each other. And because of the brokenness of the families, a lot of African families are so broken. Wherever you go, you find that African men have a thing with power because it was taken from them. And now they treat their families bad, or then they try to bribe and they try to fight their way to the top in politics. Why is there so undeveloped nations? It's because it's been cracked from the core. A nation that's been cracked from the core can never produce anything good out. Whatever we see of Africa right now, whatever we see of African people right now is a result of the brokenness that started years ago. And in the States, as they're screaming out right now, thugs or drugs and everything, if you have been crushed that way, that you're not a valuable person, your color is a sin. You have self-hate. You have people that self-sabotage. This is the prophecy for my life. I can't do better. I would rather be rapping on the streets, rapping, or then I'll do drugs. Like, you give yourself two alternatives already. So your whole life or your whole future is just dimmed because of who you have believed that you've become through that. So I feel like, a lot of brokenness.
And it might seem like a stupid question, but just to help people understand, what has that looked like around your life? Have you now, when looking back, have you been able to see similar mechanisms in your own life or in people that you've grown up with or friends?
I've seen it a lot growing up when, because there's still people who live in Africa right now. And for example, in South Africa, it's not too long ago when we had like Mandela fight for freedom against the whites who were actually, this was racism in Africa as well. And what I've seen growing up is when there would be like white people, like how they would treat their workers, how they would treat black people.
How did they?
Really rudely. They would beat them up. And sometimes you had bosses, like, I know here in Europe it's a new thing. You don't have people working for you as maids and everything. This started way back then during slavery. So it still exists in Africa where you have, people, white people moving to Africa because they have people who serve them, and that feel of power is still there. And I've seen black people just being beaten up. Sometimes if they have, for example, a dog, they'll just, if the black person did something wrong, that dog would just be set loose and they'll be bit by the dog. Or one instance that is personal was when there was this South African white man who had this, my dad had a contract somewhere, and he was showing my dad around, like where he's gonna start working, and immediately, out of nowhere, starts cussing out everybody that was in the room and threatening them, I'm gonna beat you monkeys.
No
and
way.
all those. Yeah, and so that was my
That's
first.
terrible.
Yeah, that was my first encounter of kind of like white supremacy, and seeing how my own dad was in that situation, because like every child looks at their dad like my dad is a super dad,
Yeah.
but seeing my dad kind of wither in that moment, like you feel like, oh, my dad is only strong when he's with us, but like they have the power, they own the power. And I've seen that so many times, like how my parents would be under white people, not necessarily that those white people would be bad, but just how they shrink themselves in the presence of other white people. And that, as a child, seeing that, it just kind of cripples you. And I'm not surprised why most children or most African children grow up with the same kind of shrinkingness when it comes to being in the presence of white people. It's because there is so many things related to that. Recently, I was in Malawi with my husband, Hannes. He's a Finnish guy, and two instances happened. There was a little girl, black girl, who saw him and said, "Ah, you're gonna eat me," and started crying. It's because they have heard horror stories about white people that are not necessarily true, but because of some brutality, now you have people sharing those kind of stories to kids, and kids are afraid. Like, they're gonna take my blood, or what are they gonna take from me? It's you grow up listening to that, and you think it's funny when you're growing up, like, I never believed that, but it has some effects still today. Yeah.
Exactly. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that even though we're many years away from actual slavery, and even moving away from that environment, people are strongly affected by it to this day.
Yeah. It's traumatic.
And it's apparently something that isn't just about individuals, but a huge part or a big part of the black community across the globe, and probably other groups of people as well.
Yeah.
So then you moved 8 years ago to Finland.
Yeah.
And you've studied. What has it been like living here? Have you faced racism? Have you can you help normal Finns to feel what is it like? Does everything that we've been talking about, does it affect you here? And what is it like living in Finland?
Yeah, I have only recently realized how it has actually affected me. That in situations, because there's two ways that you come out of stuff. You come out either as an angry black person, or then a striving black person. So you choose to leave it all behind and still try to make the best of your life, even though you still face stuff in your life. And I think that's what I'm facing in my life. So I've surrounded myself and being in a presence of people that, like, I don't want to suppress myself, but kind of, be on the same level with everyone, so that we throw out that race card into the bin. But I've had certain situations. For example, I was working for one charity organization, so doing fundraising, and I would stand there and talk to people. So every now and then came a racist person. So like, I'm not saying the whole Finland is racist, but every now and then, there is a seed somewhere planted, and some people learn it by just watching how people are treated back then. Oh, we call them monkeys. I'm gonna call somebody monkey too. We learn it. It's not something that's just in the blood. I've had somebody come to me once and tell me, "Hey, I wish all the African people could just die."
No way.
Yes, here in Finland, at the airport, once I was doing some fundraising, like, yeah, the problem is they just have to die with that AIDS, all of them. Like, really bad things that in those moments, like, I force myself to think, they don't know what they're talking about. And sometimes you're just like, let's move on. But then I know that that's a hurtful thing. And to somebody else, that would crush them, who are really, really being oppressed. And there's been other people who I know have experienced it even more than I have. So I cannot speak for them.
Yeah.
But there has been those instances that I have like racism, like directly to me, but I chose to kind of shush it.
Yeah.
But I feel like I regret doing that in some way, because I feel like those kind of situations you need to speak. So like it has affected me in that way. Now if you ask me how has it affected me, I haven't learned to speak out and say, hey, that's not right.
Exactly.
So I've just been like kind of taking it like a pill, a bitter pill, and just drank water on it, which I think is also one of the problems with the other African communities. We just take it as a bitter pill, take some water, and just move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are my situations, just to mention one out of them.
But now it seems like hopefully the tide is turning. There is suddenly way more awareness.
Yeah.
I've even learned so much the past few weeks through the different conversations that have been had in the public conversation and private conversations as well. What would you say is the most important message from the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think it is because now we're still, even while these things are, like the awareness is there, we still have people fighting that you're talking nonsense. And sadly, a lot even in the church. Like who are saying, no, this doesn't exist. But I think what people need to understand is this is something that has been, it has affected people, it has traumatized, it has broken people. And not saying that the whole world is a bucket full of rotten tomatoes, but there's still some bad apples around. And accepting that it is there doesn't mean that you're accepting that you are racist. Accepting that it has happened, only just, it's facts. It's not something that's made up. And I feel like the most important thing for people right now is to just, okay, I'm gonna deviate a little bit.
Feel free.
There is a problem that African people learn history the right way, all right? And then there's a lot of people that are lied to. The sadness and the bad side is not really shown to everyone in the European or the Western world. But we grow up seeing all this, like the murdering, the brutality and everything. So we're taught one side and the other people are taught only one side. So when we are fighting, it's like, you're not making sense. And no, we're like, no, you don't see it. Because actually they haven't seen it. So the problem is now is to actually go through the truth, because the constitutions and how history has been showed from different angles has been so wrong that the truth is not in the open. There is not acceptance that this actually happened and that people are not just making things up. So I feel like the most important thing right now is really get educated. Like if you want, just take a day. Read about it. The real things, and also check what you're reading. And then from there, kind of just accept that it has happened, and now we have a chance, and even talking from both sides, not just white people, but talking to Black people, we have to accept that this happened to us, and things are not good in the world, but we should choose that we want to get healed from this. And we cannot do it alone, of course. That's where we need the other hand as well. We need white people in our lives. We need white friends who can come and listen. We need to have this kind of conversation, not on set, off set as well. So we all need to talk about the skeletons in the closet. We have a lot of white friends who probably posted Black Lives Matter, but they don't really know the stories of their Black friends.
Yeah.
And the other way around.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's just needs for that openness and really discussion and digging deeper together, because we can only heal when we actually see the wound and open it up. I've learned this when I was little, that when I put a Band-Aid, it kind of postpones it. But my mom always told me, like, leave it open, let the air blow on it.
Yeah.
And then when it does, it dries quicker.
Yeah.
So like now that this is open, let's face it together, learn about it, and let the wind blow on it so that we get better. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's so good. And I think one of the things that we often, and I often repeat and say here in our church, is that we can only work on things when we accept where they're really at. And if we if it's from in this case, from the white side or the black side, we kind of don't want to see it for what it is. We will always misunderstand one another. Yeah. We will ignore the actual issues, and we won't be able to deal with what it's really, really about.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes with all of this, that we need to listen. We need to be interested to understand what is behind it, and even read history, understand what has happened through the hundreds of years, several hundreds of years. And I think also when we find, or if we find racist behavior or just thoughts, to deal with them as well, because if we never deal with them or even ignore them, nothing will change. And I truly believe things have to change a lot. You know, I'm dreaming about a different country.
Yeah.
I'm dreaming about a different kind of world where everyone is accepted, everyone is loved, everyone is appreciated exactly for who they are.
Yeah.
And you know, I think we have lots of room in Finland.
Yeah.
For a lot of people who want to move in and be part of building this country as well.
And I really love it that we actually, the church has been the most comforting place for me. I think if I was not in church in Finland, I would be out there where there's not a lot of people that are connected. Usually when there's culture differences in languages, people don't go to churches because most of them are just in Finnish. And so you're not in a church circle, in a safe place. This is what has made me feel more at home, being with people.
Yeah.
And I feel like the government, they need help from the church, basically, because I feel like this is a place where an example can be shown.
Yes.
And it's so good that I'm really thankful to have this kind of conversations, because then it brings out so much. And if there's African people in the service that have actually been like that, it's like, okay, I actually have been like that. And now we come closer, and once we get that elephant in the, notice the elephant in the room, then we build those healthy communities and where it's normal to be different and you're accepted and loved, because otherwise I don't see it coming. The government in the US has already been, it's so hard to get it from the government. It's so hard to get it from anywhere else. So I feel like the church has a really big role to play in this healing process.
We do, and I believe the society should be, and the church should be, a melting pot of all nations or all nationalities, and realizing that everyone has something beautiful to bring to the table. And as it said, until all lives matter, but until Black lives matter, not all lives matter. And truly appreciate this moment together. Anything else you have still on mind? We've touched base on a lot of different topics. And one thing I was positively surprised about, coming back to here and now, but the United States as well, is that the Minnesota government actually decided to stop the whole police department and build something new from scratch. Wow. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is the best decision that they can make, because I feel like they've realized that the foundations were not good.
Yeah.
They need to rebuild again.
Yeah.
So to me, that's really symbolic and a really powerful thing that anyone can make, because it's like, no, we realized that this wasn't working and we want to make it again. And it gives a lot of hope. And I'm just hoping that, you know, a lot of people can learn from that and see how serious this thing is. To say, if it's a bad foundation with a poisoned root, we have to take it out and build something new. Yeah. So I really like that.
Yeah. I was so happy to read about it, and I think that's kind of symbolic, as you said, to what we need to do all together. Dig down to the roots, maybe plant something new, something beautiful, something healthy, and believe that there will be more health, more love, more acceptance across all borders, and especially towards every black person. And I dream of a Finland where it's like moving to an oasis, where people actually can thrive, where people can flourish, where people can be well and settle into the society, feel part of it. Yeah. And until we're there, we have work to do together.
Yeah, for sure. These are only the first steps.
Yes, there are. And we'll have more conversations like this. But thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome to have this chat, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
It's a pleasure.
Mä uskon, että tässä ollaan opittu paljon, kuultu paljon, ja seurakuntana mä uskon, että meillä on paljon työtä tehtävänä. Meidän on tuomittava kaikki rasismi, kaikki syrjintä ja varmistaa, että kukin saa kokea, että Fila, meidän seurakunta, voi olla turvallinen paikka jokaiselle ja vielä enemmänkin paikka, jossa jokainen voi kukoistaa, saa kasvaa, saa löytää itsensä vielä paremmin ja olla oma itsensä meidän yhteisössä. Haluan myös ja uskon, että saadaan nähdä, että Suomen yhteiskunta saa muuttua ja että jokainen, joka tänne muuttaa, joka täällä asuu, saa kokea, että saa olla oma itsensä, saa asettua tänne, on tervetullut, on arvostettu. Sitä elämää me halutaan elää seurakuntana myös. Kiitos, että sä olit mukana. Nähdään ensi osiossa.